Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Best of British Blackwell. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed the last video where we made the cured egg yolk, but you're probably thinking to yourself, well, why did we bother making that? Today we're going to be making a recipe which is a little bit of an accompaniment to most of the dishes that I cook. It's a type of butter that we're going to be making. Big credit here to Guga Foods, who kind of put me onto this particular recipe. I've made a slight variation to it, as I tend to do to all of my recipes, but today we're going to be making butter of the gods, or it's just a butter really, which has loads of additional flavors in there, but it works so well with steak. So come over, take a look at the ingredients, and let's make a start. Okay, so let's have a look at the ingredients for this butter of the gods. First of all, we've got some butter here. I'm using some nice French unsalted butter. I like to use unsalted when I'm making my own butter because then that leaves it up to me just how much salt I want to add to that. A key ingredient to this is anchovy paste. Now you can use fresh anchovies in here, or you could use those in olive oil. I'm using patum pepperium, which is known as the gentleman's relish in the UK, but it is essentially dried anchovy paste. Very strange looking, but wonderfully tasting. We've got some flat leaf parsley here. Another addition to the recipe that I'm making, which varies from Guga's, is some chives. We've got a shallot here, which we're going to be chopping down nice and fine. I also like to add some blitzed up capers in there for a little bit of acidity. And then finally, the king of the ingredient in here is our fermented egg yolk, which looks a little bit like a Haribo to me, but I promise you it's a wonderful ingredient. The final thing that we'll be throwing in there is a little pinch of salt. So let's prep up these ingredients and make a start. So here we've got our beautiful bone marrow. This is completely raw, hasn't been cooked yet, but what you'll notice is there's quite a lot of blood in here. That, one, is not very appealing, and two, it doesn't taste too great. So what we need to do first is extract that blood from here, and there's a very simple way of doing that. I'm going to show you that now. So all I've done here is I've removed the bone marrow from the dish. I've got some salt. This is kosher salt. I'm going to be salting that water quite liberally, as you can see. I think there's a little bit of thyme in there as well from a previous cook. So don't worry about that too much. But what we do want to do is just give this a very quick stir, just to make sure that all of that salt mixture dissolves. Then what we're going to do is place these bone marrow pieces back in. Don't worry if it's not fully submerged yet. And place the bone marrow pieces back in one by one. And then we're going to top the water up until they are completely submerged. Once they're fully submerged, we're going to place these in the fridge, and it usually takes a couple of days for the salt to have the desired effect, which is to draw that blood out. So literally leave these in the fridge a couple of days, they'll come out and they'll be perfect. Let's have a look in a couple of days' time when these have come out. Now this bone marrow here has been soaking in that salt brine for 24 hours. Now I did previously say that this could take up to 2 days, but I did select some quite white bone marrow in the first place. So I'm very happy with how the salt water has extracted the blood from here. I've got a tiny little bit on the corner here, but I'm not too fussed about that. All I've done to this point here is I've obviously thrown away the salt water that was in here, and I've let some cold water run over these for the last minute or so, just to drain off some of the excess salt. What we're going to do now is transfer these over into a sheet-lined baking tin. I'm going to line these up the best way I can, and we're going to get these under the grill for about 5 or 10 minutes. Just before we transfer these over to the grill, the only seasoning that I'm going to be putting on these is some pepper. We don't want too much salt on here. These have already been brined in salt, so they're already going to have that on there. But a bit of pepper always adds to the flavour of this. This is a very kind of luxurious ingredient that's going in here, but honestly it's very worthwhile. When you're grilling this, just be careful. It is fatty, it can catch the grill, especially if you've got an open flame grill, so set it down quite low and raise the heat up rather than raise this towards the actual flames. There you go, so our bone marrow is in. We'll come back to this in about 10 minutes. So after about 10 minutes of grilling, that is what our bone marrow looks like. Beautiful. We've not burnt it. We don't want it burnt. That's going to give you a bitter, acrid taste. We want it just lightly grilled so it's more gelatinous. We're going to let that cool down now, and we're not going to waste any of the fats from the marrow that have fallen out into the pan because we've got our grease proof there. So it's time now just to let that cool down. Okay, so let's make a start getting these ingredients together. One of the key tools for the job is going to be one of these little food processors. If you don't have one of those, it's not the end of the world. You're just going to find that you're doing a lot of mixing and a lot of churning basically. So let me show you how I prep some of the ingredients for this and why I do it. We're going to start with the shallot. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, you're using a food processor, so why are you chopping things down? Well, what you've got to remember is that obviously we're making a butter here, so we don't want the ingredients to be too thick. And by chopping the first set of ingredients by hand, you guarantee that that is the largest that this particular ingredient is going to be in here. What do I mean by that? It sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? Right, let me explain that in a little bit more detail. I've got this little tool here which I use when I want to chop ingredients nice and fine. I'm going to chop this shallot just through the middle like that, not all the way. And then I'm going to use this here, which is, strictly speaking, I think is supposed to be for spring onions. I'm going to use that to score this shallot. Bit messy, bit cumbersome, but take your time. Now, here we go. So when I take my knife now, hopefully you can see just how small those pieces are. Now, by chopping everything this small, I can guarantee that that is the largest that the shallot is going to feature in this butter. When it goes through those blades on that food processor, it's going to get even smaller. But if I'm happy with the size of them here, I'm going to be happy with the size of them in the overall product. So I do like to go through all of the ingredients and chop them down to the largest quantity I want to see, or the largest size I want to see in proportion to the main dish. That's probably the most technical you're going to hear me speak, to be honest with you. But let me finish prepping these shallots and then we'll move on to the next stage. Okay, so I'm done with the shallots there. What I've done, I'm making 2 batches of this butter. So I've made it nice and easy for myself. I'm not going to mess up the quantities here. I have got roughly 2 teaspoons of shallots in each of these kind of jugs here. What I'm now going to do is get out some of these capers, probably about a teaspoon of each, and I'm going to just roughly chop those now as well. Now the key to these shallots is not imparting any of the, or most of the vinegar in there. So you actually want the shallot, the caper, sorry, not the shallot, the caper. You want the caper more than you want the vinegar. So just empty them out onto a piece of kitchen roll like that and let the kitchen roll absorb most of the vinegar that these are pickling in. When you've done that, take them to one side. Just finely chop them down. These, because they're pickled, these crush more than they're chopped. But they are a wonderful addition to this because they add a nice hit of acidity. Again, don't worry about chopping this up too much because again, it's going to go through that food processor, and if you don't mind a few chunky bits, that's not a problem. And then again, I just add those straight into the bowl with the shallots, and I know exactly how many ingredients going in which. You can mess with the quantities if you like more shallot in there, that's fine. If you want a little less, that's fine. If you don't like capers, don't add them. But I think they really improve this dish. In the kitchen, we'll just tidy the board up a little bit. Next ingredient is going to be our chives, and I'm not going to mess with these too much. I've taken, as you can see, a really tiny handful here. Just going to cut those down the middle, add those into the pot. Now with our other ingredients here, it's slightly different. So I've got some flat leaf parsley here. I'm just going to cut the stalks off of those because we don't really want the stalks in there. And then I'm just going to, by hand, split these down the middle. Half here, half there. It's as simple as that. Right, let's start putting this butter together. Okay, so we're at the point now where we can start to get our food processor ready. And I'll put exact quantities for each portion of butter in the bottom of the box, in the chat box at the bottom, or the comment section at the bottom there, or the description box I should say. But we've got roughly 8 tablespoons of butter. You know, I'm going to call this like 2/3 of a British kind of block of butter. We're going to go in with some fresh parsley, fresh flat leaf parsley. Let's get most of that in there. And we're also going to go in immediately with our bone marrow as well. Not messing around with this too much, I'm just getting the bone marrow, scraping it straight in there. Look, I understand that this is not to everyone's taste, but you'll hear me talk about fat and flavour quite a lot in my videos, and this is where an extreme amount of flavour is going to come from in this recipe here. It's not vegetarian, it's not vegan, it's a vegan's nightmare actually, this dish. And the last thing I'm going to do is, there's some real good stuff still hanging about at the bottom of this pan. Like I said, I'm making 2 portions here, so just a little bit of that juice in there as well. Lovely. What we're also going to do now is add in our anchovy paste, which just goes in. So you'll notice I put in 2 bone marrow bones in there, which makes a whole bone. And now we've got 1 teaspoon of the anchovy paste, which is quite a bit. That's going to go in there. And then just before I add the other ingredients, I'm actually going to give this a little bit of a blitz just to start it off, because I don't want to overfill. And what you'll find is the speed of the blades and the traction of the blades actually helps to melt the butter a little bit, although the butter was quite soft anyway. Now we're going to go in with our shallots and our capers and our chives, and we're going to give that another blitz. We're going to keep blitzing this until it's nice and fully mixed. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. Hopefully you can see the texture that we've got there. Still looking very much like butter, but with a few herbs in there, which is absolutely fine. What I think we're going to do is go in with a little bit more anchovy paste, because we really do want there to be a nice hit of this in there. Can add that in there, and it's at this stage we're also going to grate our king of ingredients, the egg yolk. So just take a little Parmesan grater here and then just start to add that in, and look, it just goes in there like a, it looks almost like orange zest, doesn't it? Now the reason that we grate this in at this stage is that if we'd have put it in before, the warmth of the blades in action in here might have had almost a cooking effect on this egg. So because we're at the very last stage of making this, we're adding it in at the last stage, so that it only needs a very light blitz. So there is method in the madness in adding this last, and we're going to put the whole thing in here. Just look at that, how that's cured beautifully, and you can just grate it like cheese. I promise you, this is such a wonderful ingredient, you really should try it. There's a link to the the recipe video that I made for this stuff just up above now. Please do give that a click. There we go, that's the whole thing grated in. Perfect. Let's put that over there. Give our hands a wipe. I'm going to get this little stir here just to make sure that all of this ends up inside the butter. And now we'll give it another blitz. A very quick one though. We don't want to do anything to harm the kind of structure of the egg in there. folding in quite nicely. We'll get the spoon in there just to make sure that all of these bits around the outside get incorporated. And then we'll be very nearly done. Beautiful. Now I'm going to show you how we need to turn this out. Okay, so we've blitzed up our butter, and now this is how we set it. And it's a very simple process. Just get yourself a nice big piece of cling film. Get your butter, start getting most of it out. Try and empty it all into pretty much the same spot if you can. It will make the next stage in this process nice and easy. Okay, so now we've got all of the butter out. All we're going to try and do here really is roll it into a tube so that we can, as and when we want it, cut some nice pieces off. And obviously this is going to set quite hard. So all we need to do is roll this over and double the cling film on itself. It doesn't really matter as long as we get out of this a decent roll. And it's at this stage which you can roll it back on itself a little bit more, but there we go. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then what we do with this is we're going to put this in the fridge and let this cool down. So now we've got this butter and these cured egg yolks, what are we going to do with them? For me, the best way of serving these up is with a beautiful steak, and that's what I'm going to show you now. But also other things to consider that you can use this butter for. It works wonderfully with seafood. It works wonderfully with kind of delicate fish, like white fishes like bream, sea bass, cod, haddock, anything like that works really nicely. Works lovely with prawns, scallops, lobster, you know, any of those kind of light white meat fishes. Beautiful in pasta as well. The other day my wife made a spaghetti bolognese and I just had a bowl of pasta with a little bit of this butter and the cured egg yolk grated in there. But let me show you how you serve this up on a steak. That's probably my favourite way of doing it. So let's have a look. So here we have it. Take a look at this beautiful piece of steak. This is just a very standard piece of ribeye that I've picked up from my local butcher. First thing we're going to do is go straight on there with this beautiful butter. I know that Guga calls this butter of the gods, but I actually quite like the term vegan nightmare. So that's what I'm going to call my variation on this beautiful, beautiful recipe. And what we're also going to go in with here is some of our lovely, lovely cured egg yolk, which, just like I did in the butter, I'm going to grate all over this steak. And hopefully you can see that pretty much as soon as this egg hits that steak, it pretty much liquidizes. It's so beautiful. I'm going to grate a good bit over the top there. Lovely. And now I'm just going to let you guys come and have a really, really good look at this. I'm going to focus right in on this for you. Just look at that. That is food heaven. Let's cut this steak open. I was aiming for a medium to medium well here. So let's just have a little cut and see. That's not a bad sign if I'm honest with you. Beautiful. We're starting to get a little bit more pink in the middle. And then we're going to have a real good taste of this. We're going to let this butter soak in to this beautiful meat. That's not bad for medium to medium rare. I'm quite happy with that. Like I said, you can use this butter on pretty much anything, but it works incredibly well with steak and seafood. Can't wait to give this a go. Wow, that is so good. So obviously, first flavour you'll hit with straight away is beautiful beef. So it's no good, I was gonna say, it's no good using this butter on an average piece of steak, but actually I'm gonna backtrack there a little bit. I think it is worth using this butter on an average bit of steak if you've got it like a bit of a rump or whatever, because it's gonna take the flavour to the next level. So you wouldn't mind a piece of steak being a little bit chewy, being a little bit tougher, if you've got that flavour profile with it. So what is the flavour profile? So bang, you hit straight away with the beef. The beef, this is a lovely piece of ribeye, top-notch butcher, A&R Bailey. Big shout out to Leighton, A&R Bailey, absolutely fantastic butcher, knows his stuff. Lined me up with this piece of meat. That's what you hit with straight away. But then what this butter adds to is the flavour profiles. So you've got those chives in there, which work really well. It's not onion, it's like a sweet onion. Obviously chives have got that kind of hit about them. Then you're hit with the onion of the shallots. Then you're hit with the saltiness of the anchovies and the acidity of the capers. And then it's all brought back down again onto a much mellow level of the butter, which isn't too salty. And obviously the cured egg yolk, which is really creamy. It's fantastic. Cured egg yolks, steak, butter, vegan's nightmare. Give it a go. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please hit the subscribe button down below. The more followers I get, the more content I can put out. Thank you. See you again soon. Bye-bye.